From Acres USA, you are listening to the Acres USA podcast, a conversational podcast where we'll explore sustainable farming, regenerative practices, and the latest innovations in eco-agriculture with some of your favorite farmers and ranchers. I'm your host, Taylor Henry, the owner and CEO of Acres USA. Welcome to the Acres USA podcast. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's podcast. Today we have an awesome guest, one of the true pioneers of bridging the worlds of agriculture and medicine. Dr. Arden Andersen is a name well known in regenerative agriculture space, but his influence goes far beyond farming. Dr. Andersen is a physician, agricultural scientist, and author of 3 groundbreaking books: Science in Agriculture, The Anatomy of Life and Energy in Agriculture, and The Food Plague. His work challenges the conventional wisdom that chemical-intensive farming is necessary to feed the world, instead of advocating for an approach rooted in energy balance, soil health, and the science of plant nutrition. Dr. Andersen's conversation is very interesting, but I will say there is a little bit of some controversial topics in here. He talks about childhood vaccine schedule. He's not opposed to vaccines, but he does challenge some of the conventional wisdom in this episode. So if hopefully you enter this with an open mind and take a listen to some of what Dr. Andersen has to talk about. He's a very, very thoughtful and insightful person to listen to speak. So hope you enjoy today's episode, and thanks for listening. All right, so we're joined here with Arden Andersen. Arden, thank you for joining the Acres USA podcast, and welcome back to the Acres USA community.
Thank you very much, Taylor. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. So I think you've done a lot of amazing work for us. We still sell your books. They're still very popular. But you want to kind of dive into how you got to the point of writing books and getting to the point that you are in right now?
Absolutely. I actually was raised on a dairy farm, did an undergraduate degree at Arizona in ag education, and taught vocational agriculture at the high school level. But I only did it for a year because Kerry Reams offered me an opportunity to go and spend time with him. And I figured, well, I'm not going to get that a second time. And so I spent 18 months with Kerry Reams, traveling and doing research with him and interacting. At the same time with Dan Scow, at the same time. And then when the thing kind of fell apart with Kerry Reams' age and so on, I ended up with Dan Scow as his laboratory and research assistant. So I did all the soil testing for him for a while, as well as a number of his research plots, a lot of foliar spraying and so on, plus some interaction with him in his vet practice, but it was more the soil side of the equation. And the one thing that I noticed, having taken the Reams classes a number of times, having helped Dan Scow teach the Reams classes, was that the information was a bit convoluted. And Dr. Reams used a lot of terminology that he didn't have to use. Terminology that confuse people. Anions and cations, for example. Well, there's basic definitions of anions and cations, and he didn't use them for that. And so having somewhat of an educational background, as well as a pretty good science and engineering background, I decided there are appropriate terms and ways to use this information. And so I said, we've got to get this down. One, he's not going to be around forever, so we need to get this into writing, something that people can understand a little bit better. And that way we can get that information out there to more people. And so that was really the initiation of Anatomy of Life and Energy in Agriculture. I sent the rough draft to Charles Walters, and Chuck called me and said, hey, I think you got something here. I want to publish that. And so the rest is kind of history. We moved on from there. And I also then started doing consulting on my own in about 1986, somewhere in that range. And fortunately, I was able to interact quite closely with Phil Callahan. He actually was involved in my doctorate program, and was able to travel with him several times to various places, 2 times to Ireland, studying the round towers and megalithic tombs, and doing some work with him on that research. I've met Tom when Tom was at the university, so I've known Tom for a long time. Dykstra. And so Phil Callahan was one of the people that said, look, Arden, you really need to go to medical school. You've got to put all this together. You really need to go to medical school. And I wasn't necessarily thinking in that direction at that time, but had another friend of mine told me the same thing. So eventually I went to medical school, but I was 34 when I went to medical school. So I'd already done quite a few things. I already knew when I went to medical school that I was not going to be a conventional doctor. I was not interested in that. That was not a part of me. And ever, it wasn't a part of my family, my parents. And so I kind of bide my time getting through medical school and the postgraduate training and so on. And then I've really not done a whole lot of conventional medicine. I've done some, obviously, you have to, but I then got back into the military and retired in 2020 as a flight surgeon, 29 years as a full colonel. So I have a broad background of that aspect as well on human health, public health, and then continued with agriculture. And for 10 years, from 1998 to 2008, I traveled between 100 and 200,000 miles, traveling around the world teaching these classes. And 13 countries, 5 continents, 3 languages. And so I have seen about every crop you can name in pretty much every kind of climatic condition that you can name, as well as I've seen complete failures and amazing successes of farmers all around the world under all of those different conditions. And so, as I've found, as I have known for a long time, as Carrie Reams taught, you cannot separate agriculture from human nutrition, from human health. You cannot separate it. A lot of people would like to believe that there's a separation there, but there's not, because food is the most important aspect of our health, and food comes from agriculture. It doesn't come from any place else. It comes
Yeah.
from agriculture.
How
And
unique is it that you had this agricultural background and turned it into a medical profession? I mean, how
there's quite a
unique
few.
are you?
Yeah, it's pretty unique. There's quite a few people, quite a few docs that were originally in farming and then they went to medical school and that's all they did. They didn't go back and integrate the two together. They just remained physicians. And maybe when they retired, quit practicing medicine, oh, they may have gone back and farm, and some do, go back and get a farm, hobby farm or something of that nature. But really, it's very unique to do both at the same time and continue to integrate that. And pretty much every time that I teach an ag class, I end up speaking an hour or 2 hours on medicine, on human health, because there's always those questions from the farming community or the attendees there. And I always make that correlation to what you're growing is going into your mouth or somebody's mouth, and it is making a difference one way or the other in their health. And so I continue to drive that home so that farmers truly appreciate that what I do in the medical practice is directly affected by what they're doing on their day job.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, wouldn't you say that a, a beginner level education in agriculture would be a very important thing for doctors to have?
I think so,
Yeah.
absolutely. And unfortunately, that doesn't happen. We don't even get any nutritional education in medical school, so
Yeah.
it's pretty sad, really.
So what are some of the dots that you connected beginning with agriculture, studying it, and then going back into the medical field? What are some of the things that you had a different perspective on that a lot of your colleagues didn't have?
I think one of the first thing was is growing up on the farm. Both my father and my grandfather recognized that nutrition was a key thing to animal health, and so nutrition was also a key thing to human health. And so as I got more and more into medicine, just observing patients, the underlying issue is always their diet and lifestyle. And yes, we have to use medications, and we do use medications for a lot of things. And some people are just not interested in anything other than, doctor, just give me a pill. I don't have a lot of patients like that anymore, but I do have a few. Most patients come to me today because they want a solution. And so that also is not looked at in standard medicine. All they're looking at is, here, what medication do you want me to write a script for and have a nice day? Where today most people want, okay, yes, doctor, I don't want all those drugs. How do I reverse this condition? How do I solve this condition problem? And so that starts out with diet and lifestyle. And so making that connection, and my wife has really been a great contributor of that for me as well. She's really the biochemist, Lisa Everett Anderson, and she is a clinical pharmacist, clinical nutritionist, and she's forgotten more biochemistry than I know. And she understands biochemistry functionally in her mind. So she can see the Krebs cycle, she can see all the biochemical pathways in her mind. So she talks to somebody and she can tell you what biochemical pathway is or isn't functioning properly. So she's really helped me to contribute to that information on understanding why things are happening. And once you understand some of the whys things are happening, then you can solve them. And that's for me, that then really sung true with what Reams talked about in his first booklet that he put out with Dan Scow, The Farmer Wants to Know, talked about the issue that insects, diseases, and weeds are not random. They're not just there because God hates us. They're there because we as farmers, we as humans have set up those conditions for those insects, diseases, and weeds to be there and to proliferate. And if you want to change that, you change the terrain. And biochemistry and microbiology in particularly say the terrain determines who is dominant in that environment and who is submissive in that environment. Phil Callahan then brought that through along with Shaboso on the insect side of the equation. And Tom has then further solidified that in the science and the actual physics that are associated with that. So it's really important when you understand that all of the things we're dealing with, the glyphosate issue, the pesticide contamination, the endocrine disruptors in the environment, all of the cancers that we see increasing in all the agriculture states and pretty much around the world, all of that is there because we have refused to understand the terrain determines who dominates and who is submissive. And that means insects, diseases, and weeds are there because we've created the environment for them to be there. And if we don't want them to be there, we change the environment, which means we have to change the soil from a nutritional perspective, a mineralization perspective, as well as a microbiome perspective. And when we change that, we change who dominates in the system. And what glyphosate does, as we know, wipes out the good guys. So now who dominates? All the pathogens. They dominate. But that's an environmental thing. That's not because we have a deficiency now of fungicides or a deficiency of a bactericide or we have a deficiency of some new variety, genetic engineered variety out there to survive in this environment. No, you change the environment. That's what you have to do. And that's what I've seen both. It applies in human medicine, it applies in the field. Medicine is a little more complex because our human body is a little bit more complex biochemistry, but nonetheless, the principle is still the same.
What is the connection between the microbiome in our gut and the microbiome in the soil?
Oh, interesting. The microbiome in our gut is completely determined by the terrain. So, what is your diet? Your diet determines who's going to, again, dominate the gut and who's going to be submissive. The fertilizers, the tillage, the planting materials that I put out in the soil is going to determine what microbiome dominates that digestive system. And so the thing about it is that we know in medicine more and more we talk about the gut brain interaction, we talk about the gut bone interaction, the gut muscle interaction, all of those things, because the majority of hormones that we produce in the body are actually produced in the gut by the microbiome. And there is a direct connection, nervous wise, between the gut and our brain. And so, if we want to solve mental health issues, you got to solve the gut issues. Pretty much everything that comes in my door, there's something going on in the gut. And that's where it starts. And if we don't change that, which means that's your diet, as well as some of your supplementation, as well as, well, what other things are you putting in your diet, maybe on top of the food? that determines what microorganisms are going to survive and not survive, and which microorganism, by that who survives, what are they producing? What hormones are they producing? What amino acids and other things are they going to be producing? Exactly the same as in the soil.
So that comes in where it's like the old apple adage where the apple from 100 years ago was much more nutritionally dense than the apple of today. How important is the way that we grow our food to get the things that we need in our gut?
Well, that's where it starts, really. And the reason that we have really bred away from a lot of the original varieties is because, again, environment determines who dominates and who is submissive. So if you plant a variety of a crop that requires a full spectrum of nutrition for it to be healthy, and particularly to have high bricks, and as Tom's talked about, we wanted above 14 bricks, and we only put out 2/3 of what's necessary there, that crop is not going to be very strong. It's going to be infected by diseases and insects and taken out. So we hybridize it. And all the hybridization is doing is hybridizing to grow with now only 2/3 the amount of nutrition. Well, over 100 years of that, we're down to maybe 10 or 20% of the nutrition. So we keep hybridizing so that the crop, the variety, will grow on a narrower and narrower spectrum of nutrients, of elements that we put out there. So, of course, the Brix readings are low, and the nutrient density of that crop are lower and lower and lower, and narrower in perspective in the whole spectrum of nutrients that we need, at least 60 nutrients that we need out there. And we're getting fewer and fewer and fewer of those because that's the way we're fertilizing. And so the hybridization is all about keeping up with how we've destroyed the soils. Really, that's what it's about. And so if we want to get back to the old varieties, which truly have the potential to outproduce the current varieties, you will never do that with modern day fertilization. It just is not going to be done. We have to go back. Well, maybe not even back. We have to go forward to a more broad spectrum nutrition, a better quality nutrition. That's really where it's at. And then we can get back to some of those older varieties that actually are better varieties, require a full spectrum nutrition to be healthy and high bricks, which then is directly transferred to the consumer.
Is there any way to manipulate Brix readings through chemistry?
Always, you can always do that. Brix reading, it's like any other instrument as well, how you take it. And I've seen farmers on a hot day, it's 100 degrees out, the wind's blowing a little bit, and they're standing facing the sun with the refractometer in front of them. And they put a little drop on there and they look at it for a minute and, oh, it's gone. Yeah, because the wind just dehydrated that and it's gone. So then they put another drop, another drop, another drop. So you end up with a fictitiously high Brix reading. But that's operator error. That's not instrument error. And so, yes, we can manipulate that. The lower the overall nutrient level, the greater the swing in Brix reading, typically from 5 o'clock in the morning to 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And so part of stability is also higher Brix over time. And so we want that Brix reading to be above 14 24/7. Now, maybe that means at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, it's an 18, but it never drops below 14. And that means that it will have the complexity of nutrients that are not digestible by the insect's digestive system. It will not have those components that are necessary for the pathogens. Because also, when we have a high Brix product, high Brix crop, we have that whole thing covered by microorganisms that are protective. It's part of the external digestive system. Just like on our bodies, on our skin, we're covered by trillions of bacterial organisms on our skin. We have to be. If we're not, that's when we get sick. That's when we get infections and we have a problem.
Hey there. Did you attend our EcoAg conference this year in Madison, Wisconsin? Well, if you didn't, or if you did, we've got the recordings now available. Get on-demand access to every session with the EcoAg recordings. Learn directly from the pioneers of soil health, livestock integration, and profitable regenerative systems, all at your own pace. Speakers include Gabe Brown, Alan Williams, John Kemp, Joel Salatin, and a lot more. We also have additional products that include the full-day workshops done by Matt Powers, John Kemp, Nigel Palmer, Jordan Green, Mark Shepard, and Austin Unruh. These workshops are in depth and will help you dig deep on the presenters' topics. Grab your recordings now at conference.eco-ag.com/24 recordings or find the link in the notes. Because the best investment you can make is in your own knowledge. Now back to the show. Yeah. I get worried, with as say that the bricks reading becomes an important thing that the giant corporations will find a way to play with it, I guess.
Well,
That's
yeah, you
where that
still look at
question
the
came.
weakest point of the plant. You look at averages over time. And that way you have enough data collection. It's sort of like another analogy. If you go out and soil test and all you do is take one probe out of the entire field and you base everything on that one probe, there's not an agronomist around that will tell you that's an acceptable means of soil testing. You go out, you take several probes, mix them together. Now that's that one section of the farm. You go to another or field, you go to another section, do the same thing. Many probes, mix them together. That's your sample. And it's the same thing with bricks reading. If all I do is take one bricks reading in an entire 80-acre field and say, oh, there's my bricks, you're misleading yourself, particularly if you're not correlating it with what your observations are relative to insect pressures, relative to nutrient availability or nutrient deficiencies, relative to dehydration of that crop. What does it look like? What does it feel like? And then you check a bricks reading on that and say, oh, my bricks reading is 18. Yeah, but the crop is dehydrated. Of course it's 18, or I've got all kinds of insect pressure, or I've got fungus problems out there. Your bricks reading is not correlated to what the observations are, and we need more bricks readings. And you'll find, particularly if you go to the weakest point of the crop, you'll find, oh yeah, the bricks reading does correlate to my problem here.
Got it. What are some of the things that you're seeing in your medical office as far as patients coming in of issues that they're having? I guess, can you give an example of where a different diet would fix the problems that they're having? Or do you see consistent problems coming in that you didn't see 10, 15 years ago?
I think, one, they're more complex. When I started practice in the late 90s, typically it was pretty straightforward treating ADD children, autistic children. We could get resolution usually within 3 to 6 months by just changing their diet, getting some good microbes in there, and some nutritional change. And these kids responded. Today, it's 10 times as complex. There's more serious damage in the gut going on. There's more serious damage in the brain. We have more competing products. And what I mean by that are really toxicities. We have more endocrine disruptors out there today than we had 20 years ago, 30 years ago. We have lower nutrient food. So even you take a salad, for example, the salad today versus that same salad 30 years ago, there's less nutrient in it. So it's more difficult to turn these children around. We're seeing more autoimmune disorders today. We're seeing more chronic fatigue. We're seeing more endocrine problems. In other words, more thyroid issues, more hormone issues. We're seeing more infertility problems. We're seeing more miscarriages, more birth defects. We're seeing a lot more neurological problems as well, peripheral neuropathy. We're seeing issues, more memory issues, more eye issues of macular degeneration and detached retinas. those kinds of things. And what we see is just there's so many more things competing for the nutrition, and we have less nutrition.
Yeah.
And
I guess how much of that, so I have some babies myself. We have a 1 year old and three, almost three.
congratulations, by the way.
Thank you. They're awesome. What is it, what can we do that like the beginning stages of a child's life obviously is super important.
Yep.
What has changed now that you think is leading to these more complex issues as the child ages, and what can we avoid if we can? Obviously we provide a good food source, but what other things are you seeing in the medical side of things that are leading to some of this stuff?
Over and over and over, as the literature shows, vaccinations is a problem. Toxic vaccinations is a problem. And if you take the schedule from 1970 versus a schedule today, there are 3-4 times the number of vaccines going into these children today as there were back then. And when you start putting a pencil to it, you can do it yourself. You can calculate the amount of aluminum that we're not putting through the digestive system. So there's some kind of barrier we're injecting into the bloodstream that goes right into the nervous system. Aluminum is a neurotoxin. We still have some mercury in some vaccines as well. Plus, we have a whole bunch of other things in there that it's one thing to put them onto your skin, and so you have some kind of barrier there, the skin. It's another thing as well to put it in the digestive system, so you still have a barrier, as opposed to actually injecting into the bloodstream, where you have no immune barrier to protect the organism from whatever that toxin is that you're shoving in there. And so that is a big thing that we see challenging the nervous system, challenging the gut. And it's like anything else, Taylor. Nothing is absolutely 100%. You know, people who smoke a pack or 2 packs a day, not 100% of them get lung cancer, but virtually 100% of them will have some consequence. COPD, emphysema, pretty much 100% of smokers that smoke a pack a day for 30 years, they have emphysema. Now, they don't necessarily get cancer, but they do get emphysema. And so it's the same thing. The argument can be about vaccinations. It can be about whatever you want to do, the exposure. Not 100% of the people are going to have the most adverse reaction. That is correct. But all of them will have some type of reaction. And there's been now 3 studies that I know of where they looked at children vaccinated versus unvaccinated. The vaccinated children were sick more often. They had more doctor's visits. They had more problems. They had more allergies than the unvaccinated children. And so there is a consequence to putting those toxins into the child. My recommendation is if parents are choosing to vaccinate, number one, spread them out. Do your homework as to what ones are truly the most important ones. Do not start before age 2 because the blood-brain barrier doesn't close until age 2. So we don't do anything that challenges that blood-brain barrier before age 2. And so that's a delay in that. And so then, as well, as I said, choose, and we don't load them up with a half a dozen of them on the same day. It's just too much toxicity going into the system. We also then, if we're going to do that, we recommend some homeopathics for them, for their fevers and some of their reactions, to address that if we have to with that process. The next thing that we see is that children are not getting fresh air and exercise that they did when 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago. Today, one thing we see is childhood obesity is a huge problem, but they're not getting outside to play. When I grew up, we were not allowed really. You didn't come in the house except to eat, wash, shower, and go to bed. you're outside the rest of the time. Now, on the farm, of course, you're working, but even my neighbor friends, they were outside playing during the day. They weren't in front of a computer, they weren't in front of a phone. They were outside getting exercise and fresh air. And that's just not today either. So that's part of the immune system also. Fresh water, adequate water, as opposed to all the soda drinks and pasteurized juices and all that kind of nonsense. That's just sugar. So a lot more of that going into these. That stresses the immune system. That stresses the developmental processes needing nutrition in order to grow and develop. And so when you add all those things together, now you have the perfect storm. And it's easy for a lot of people want to just point to one thing. It's just the vaccine. Oh, it's just the sugar. It's just this. No, it's a combination of all of those things, and you need to address as many of them appropriately as you can, and then go from there.
What's your current take then on? There's been some things in the news lately between measles and then the bird flu.
Right.
That's been happening. What is your, I guess, thought process on these?
Well, there's certainly that's really a hot topic politically. They're really trying to go after RFK Jr. and say, oh, it's his fault that they had all this and that. But the thing about it is, reality is, most of these are from are not wild type measles virus. They're vaccine spread measles virus, because when you do a genetic evaluation of them, you find out that measles virus itself actually was a spread from a vaccinated child shedding virus, and the majority of the children are already vaccinated. So it's people would like to believe that, oh, well, the only children that got measles were unvaccinated. That's not true. I think RFK said here recently, like 75% of the children that have measles were vaccinated. And so the other thing is, we know it's a vitamin A problem. Same as flu is a vitamin A issue, deficiency. And most kids are not getting enough vitamin A. They're not getting enough vitamin D. They're not getting enough B vitamins. They're not getting enough vitamin C. None of those basic things necessary for the immune system to work properly. Again, it's about the terrain. So we've sterilized the terrain so we don't have an immune system that addresses that from that perspective. The other thing, and I saw a very interesting statement and the other day, and that is that the government is slaughtering everything rather than only slaughtering the sick. Why would you slaughter animals that survive the virus? Because they're now immune.
Yeah, we're talking about the bird flu now, not
That's
measles.
correct.
Yeah.
Right. What you said, bird flu and the measles, the two things. So why would we want to get rid of immune organisms? Why wouldn't we want to breed those? Because now we would have, less susceptible organisms. And so, because that also is what they're really concerned about when you have an immune system problem. The flu is also potentially dangerous to children, young children, and particularly because of diarrhea, they get dehydration and you can't get fluids into them, which is also a problem with adults, elderly adults. So both ends of the age spectrum, very young, very old, dehydration is oftentimes the primary killer. Once they get an infection like that. But I think it really goes back to, again, what are we doing to the microbiome? Whether it's a microbiome in the chicken, it's a microbiome in the human, because that's a big part of our immune system. And if we are not taking care of that, when we do get exposed to a virus, then we are not equipped to address that virus very well.
Hey, eco-farmers. This is Taylor Henry with Acres U.S.A. I hope you enjoy this podcast as much as I enjoy interviewing these folks. If you're serious about regenerative agriculture, I've got an incredible resource you need to check out, the Acres U.S.A. membership. You farm in the physical world, and you deserve a physical printed magazine to match. Since 1971, Acres U.S.A. magazine has been the leading voice in ecological agriculture. delivering the best insights from regenerative farmers, agronomists, and researchers to help you farm profitably without toxic chemicals. Our membership included physical and digital copies of the magazine each month of the year, which has always been a standard for Acres U.S.A., but we wanted to over-deliver on content. When I acquired this business, I was happy to find that we had years of audio files from presentations at our annual EcoA conference. And guess what? They were hiding. Well, not anymore. We developed this membership portal that gives you access to the recordings from farmers like Gabe Brown, Gary Zimmer, Joel Salatin, and Mark Shepard. We also include recordings of private events. Finally, if you are like me and you like listening to content, we are now producing a membership-only podcast of each issue of the magazine, so you can consume each article while you're out in the field. To make things even sweeter, you'll get discounts on books, workshops, and events to keep expanding your knowledge. So are you ready to take your farming to the next level? Join today for a ridiculously low price at eco-farming.com or see details in the notes. So vaccines, their reaction they have in our gut biome, what is the reaction, or what's a similar type of chemical that we use in agriculture that has a reaction in the soil? Because I know people compare antibiotics to different chemicals in the soil.
Yep.
What are we doing to the soil
Well,
that's similar?
Glyphosate is.
So you would compare glyphosate to a vaccine?
Well, not actually antibiotic. It's
Antibiotic.
like putting an antibiotic out there.
Yeah.
The vaccines, a lot of their toxic issue is heavy metals. So using fertilizers, spent acid fertilizers that have aluminum, lead, various things like that in there. I'm not saying the vaccines have lead in them, but they do have aluminum in there and they do have mercury in there, in many of them. Not all of them. They did take it out of some, but not all of them.
Why do they have it in there?
They put it in as a stimulant to try to push the immune system to react to the vaccine. That's part of what it's in there for, as well as mercury is an antiseptic as well. Originally, they were looking at it from that perspective, but to stimulate the immune system.
And why does fertilizer put it in?
Why is fertilizer put in the soil, you mean?
No, why does fertilizer have the aluminum in it?
Oh, because they're using cheap grade basic materials. So trace minerals, a lot of trace minerals, the spent junk stuff comes out of the metal processing industry. So they may have zinc, a zinc product, or a copper product, or an iron product, but it comes out of the spent acid industry. So in other words, when they have a metal thing that they need to clean before they paint it, they use either phosphoric acid or hydrochloric acid or nitric acid to clean the surface of that metal before they paint it. Well, in that process, that acid picks up the heavy metals as well. It picks up the lead, the aluminum, the mercury, and other things that go with that, cadmium, and so on. So industry typically would have to dispose of that as a toxic waste. But as soon as you change the label from a toxic waste, heavy metal, to a fertilizer, because also coming with that is some zinc or copper or iron, you now sell it to the farmer as an inexpensive trace mineral, but it's loaded with heavy metals.
Yeah.
And so we end up with that problem out there.
Do you find it odd that the same group of folks that would agree that we should stop spraying glyphosate, stop spraying herbicides or insecticides, pesticides, but then don't use the same questioning when it comes to the medical side of things? I guess my point to all this is like the same things we're doing to the soil are similar to what we're doing in our body, but then the same person that it says I'm only going to eat organic because I don't want all these chemicals in doesn't question the medical side of things as much. That's why it's so interesting talking to you.
Yeah, it's always easier to get the other guy to do something. Or, I can do it out in the field, but, I don't want to do it in the house. I see that a lot. I see that absolutely a lot. People take care of their pets better than they do themselves, in many cases. They'll take care of their cows or their beef animals better than they will their own family. type of thing. I guess that's just, partly human nature as far as how that process works. And I think education is part of the process. We have to continue to say that. We have to continue to put that picture together for people, that the same principles that apply to their dairy cows, their crops in the field, apply to their children, apply to them as far as the diet that they take in. And you're not going to get high bricks crops using amateur products, basically. And you're not going to get good health using poor quality inputs on the dinner table. I mean, it's just not going to happen. And but it's habit. The other thing that I see, because my wife and I were just watching a film. Back in World War II, we had what were called victory gardens. And victory gardens were essentially mandated that everybody had a victory garden, because that was the primary way that you ate, because food was was short. Everything was rationed. And if you go back at that same time in Iowa, in the Midwest, Wisconsin, wherever you were, everybody had a garden. Everybody raised a good portion of their own food. Today, you'll be lucky to find 1% of farmers in the Midwest with a garden. But they'll go to McDonald's and buy a piece of crap that they put in their mouth, and then they complain because they got high blood pressure or they've got some other problem going on. But they should be having a garden, because also that garden will help teach them how to be better farmers, in my opinion, if they're really paying attention to that process.
Yeah. Well, I know you got to get going, and I think we could probably talk for a long time. I have 1,000 more questions to ask you, but
I
is there
appreciate
anything?
that.
Is there anything to kind of wrap all this up? What's your message to
Well, yes, thank you very much
folks?
for that. I think the future really of what we've been working on, myself, Michael McNeil, Don Huber, and a few others, and that is that we're looking at how are we going to get field testing out there to more rapidly improve the farm, more rapidly make decisions to get that nutrient out there where we want it. And we're looking at XRF. There's a guy out of Texas Tech. His name is David Weindorf, Texas Tech, and he's actually combining XRF with the visual near infrared. He's got a patent on it. And I think that's going to be the future of farm testing. We can test it literally right in the field, multiple tests, soil and crop, and get an instant reading on that. And I think within 2 years, that will be the mainstay. I think it's better than tissue testing, it's better than SAP testing, because it's immediate and we can make an immediate decision and a more broad spectrum process on that. Then I think a lot of farmers are really going to be able to take that next step with improved nutrition. Particularly the ones who want to do that are going to be able to do that. But I see that as the future. That's kind of been kind of my pet project here in the last year or so. And we're definitely getting closer and closer to having an answer that is viable for all farmers to apply.
That's
Yes,
amazing. So you have a positive outlook.
I do. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think it's exciting times. There's nothing like challenges to bring out the best in good people. So,
Yeah. Well, we appreciate your time. You can check out Dr. Andersen's books at our website, but you can also, just Google him and you'll be able to find out how to connect with him. Is there
right.
anything else
Healing
you'd
Arts
like to
Center
mention?
in Lenexa, Kansas.
Say it again.
Healing Arts Center, Kansas City. It's Healing Arts Center. Lenexa is actually the suburb of Kansas City.
And that's a family physician, or you work with families there? Or,
Absolutely,
yeah.
absolutely, I do. It's a large practice. We have chiropractors, acupuncturists, massage therapists, and a couple other specialties here, and then myself as the physician doing family practice and integrative medicine. Yes.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Taylor. It's
Appreciate it.
been a pleasure. Have a good day, sir.
Thank you for listening to the Acres USA podcast, a podcast production of Acres USA. Find us on Spotify, Apple, Google Play, and other popular podcast platforms. Acres USA is North America's oldest publisher on production-scale organic and regenerative farming. For more than 50 years, our mission has been to help farmers, ranchers, and market gardeners grow food profitably, regeneratively, and with nature in mind. Find our books and other Acres USA media and learn about Acres USA events at acresusa.com. Read our online magazine at members.acresusa.com, and we'd like to thank Acres USA staff for their contributions to producing this podcast. This episode was edited and engineered by Weston Larson of Acres USA. And we're grateful to our guests for taking the time to talk with us about their experiences.